Hello, friends and colleagues. It is Dr. Christian A. Friend of CA Friend Consulting, and I am here to share with you another piece of your organizational development puzzle. Well, it is March of 2021, and I've been spending a lot of time with organizations talking about burnout. It's been a year since most of the country went into some form of lockdown for the pandemic. Um, and that has really changed working conditions for folks all over the country and, in fact, all over the world. A lot of folks are working remotely, and that has impacted us. And one of the things folks are continuing to talk about is experiencing burnout. And recently in Harvard Business Review, there's been a great series called The Burnout Crisis that talks about this burnout. And so I want to share with you, as leaders and business professionals, some information about burnout that comes from, in particular, one article called Beyond Burned Out by Jennifer Moss. And of course, I'll leave a link to that article in the description of this video, but I'll summarize it pretty quickly and talk about how it applies to the work that you do in your organization, whether that be a nonprofit or for profit, in any type of organizational setting. Well, the first thing you need to know is, what are we talking about when we talk about burnout? And so sometimes people think about burnout as just, I've worked too many hours, or I've worked too long, or I've worked at the same job for a long time. And those can be things that are correlated with what we refer to as burnout. But burnout is more specifically chronic workplace stress. And that chronic workplace stress has six causes, according to researchers. And those six causes are unsustainable workload, perceived lack of control, insufficient rewards for effort, a lack of a supportive community, and lack of fairness is number five. And number six would be mismatched values and skills. So the individual skills are mismatched for the organization. Well, that those are things that can cause burnout, and we saw some degree of that burnout before the pandemic. Now, since the pandemic, burnout has been exacerbated and accelerated, so that increasingly in organizations, folks are talking about burnout, what causes it, and how to deal with it. So that raises the question then of what happened as part of this global pandemic that led to kind of this increase in burnout. And I would imagine that some of you all are actually experiencing this burnout yourselves. It can be a feeling of exhaustion, a feeling of being overwhelmed. You can feel emotional in various different ways. You can feel angry at times. You can feel grieved or saddened, seemingly unexpectedly. And these is all hints that you're experiencing some burnout. So whether it be for you or for people you work with or teams that you supervise, it's good to understand kind of where this is coming from. So as I mentioned, this existed before the pandemic, obviously. However, it's been exacerbated during the pandemic. And so then the question arises, well, what happened during the pandemic that led to this increased amount of burnout or feeling of burnout amongst people? And the better question might be sometimes, what didn't we do as leaders of organizations that has led to this increased amount of burnout? And so this Harvard Business Review article suggests there's a few things that we didn't do. First, we didn't adjust workloads. And so for many of us, we've actually had increased workloads during the pandemic, whereas you may have been able to schedule, 3 or 4 meetings in a very busy day because of travel time and meeting space before the pandemic. Now, many folks are having back-to-back virtual meetings, sometimes having 5 or 6 meetings in a day, up to 8 or 9 meetings in a day, and then still having to catch up on email and then do other work tasks after that. And so we didn't adjust workloads. We also didn't give people a lot of autonomy, control, or flexibility. And so as we've transitioned to remote work in many spaces, or transition just in dealing with COVID, in many cases, the regulations, the rules have become even more restrictive or more intentional about kind of providing control for the organization and not flexibility for the employee. Also, we've allowed these increased levels of meetings to happen. And what goes along with those increased levels of meetings is unhealthy levels of screen time. So we have to recognize that it is not healthy for us as individuals to be constantly in front of screens. Human beings weren't designed that way and weren't meant to operate that way. It can affect us psychologically, emotionally. It certainly does affect us physically, particularly if you're not sitting, excuse me, if you are sitting all day, don't have a stand desk or a means, if you're not getting enough movement in during the day. And honestly, this article suggests, and I also believe and advise that we have failed to recognize the extent of people's struggles. And so, for me, I don't have small children, for example, or school age children. My kids are grown and out of the house. So for many of us, we didn't recognize like what it would mean to be a parent during this pandemic while working remotely, for example. So having to provide childcare for your children or remote learning for your children while you're in school and still have the same workload, increased screen time, lack of flexibility. You can imagine how these things would work together to create an increased amount of burnout, not just in an individual, but in an entire workforce, right? And so, how do we beat it? And this is what's important to me, and a big part of the message I want to relay is that some of us are increasingly aware that burnout exists. We might even, as business leaders, be becoming aware that that burnout exists for the reasons that I've articulated earlier and that are articulated in Harvard Business Review. And we think sometimes that the solution to those things is self care. And self care is absolutely important. We have to monitor kind of our fluid intake. We talked about standing and movement throughout the day. We have to think about outdoor time and ensuring that we get those things, exercise and healthy diet, and how that helps us manage this workload that we're talking about. But that is an individual level solution. And individual level solutions can be implemented by individuals and they can be impactful for individuals. And what we have yet to do in many cases is to implement organizational level or institutional level solutions. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. If you're a leader of an organization or an institution, it's important that you understand that as a leader, it's our job to help address these issues of burnout in our organizations. And there's some ways to do that. Um, One is to remind people that they have a sense of purpose or that they have purpose in their work. I've had conversations recently with folks who are feeling like they are unappreciated or underappreciated. And so it's been my role as a leader to remind them like you are appreciated, and that our work is important, that the work we do creates change, or that the work we do creates an impact, whatever that impact may be. It's important now more than ever to connect people's work to a larger purpose. And as a leader in an organization, that's our role. We also have a very important role in managing workload, particularly as senior leaders. We can't just expect employees to pick up more and more work under these conditions and assume that we can move forward as an organization. We have to help employees manage their workload and balance their workload by, for example, taking unnecessary meetings off the calendar, ensuring that when we're asking for meeting time, that it's important, that it needs to happen. We can think about how we schedule meetings. Do we always schedule for an hour? Can we cut this meeting time to 30 minutes or 45 minutes? Can this be a telephone call instead of a video call to cut down on that screen time? And just to be checking in with folks regularly is another strategy in that area. Finally, we have to create spaces at work where it's safe to discuss mental health. And I cannot emphasize this enough, that as leaders, we have to be able to talk about and create room for discussions around mental health. This can be a challenge because oftentimes mental health and mental health issues are stigmatized, and people might be concerned about talking about it, particularly in their workplace. So, some strategies for doing this at an institutional organizational level are to create a mental health resource page if you have an intranet, or even on your website, the employee website, to make sure that you have access to those resources or that employees have access to those resources. Um, we have control over time, oftentimes as senior leaders. So we can think about reduced hours, flex time, comp time, or even just adding more paid time off for employees. We also need to give employees an opportunity to reach out to peers and create peer-to-peer connection programs where that's possible. And then finally, as a manager and as a manager of managers, you want to ensure that managers are checking in with their direct reports immediately, and just checking in to see how are they doing for their mental emotional health, how are they managing things, how do they feel in terms of their workload, and any other feedback they have for that manager and for the organization. This is showing empathy is in part, and having an empathetic manager is a big help. And so as leaders of organizations, we need to be training ourselves, and then training other leaders in the organizations about how to lead with empathy. And so all of these are important. And I'll close by saying a final strategy for dealing with this increased burnout that we're experiencing now is having a sense of connection. And for some people, this could be family and friends. And so you want to encourage folks to take time off, connect with family and friends. But you also want to make sure that there's some means to connect inside of the organization or provide resources for it, whether it be through an employee assistance program or some other method. Folks, no matter what business you're in, whether it's human services or banking or media or entertainment, we're all in the business of dealing with our employees, of dealing with people and connecting with people. And so I just wanted to take a moment to share this video to help your organization develop, to have another piece of the puzzle, excuse me, particularly as we're dealing with these issues that have arisen out of this global pandemic. Again, I've got the link to the full resource in the description of the video. Please do like the video, subscribe to the channel, and please let us know by commenting, like, are there other ways that we can support you in your work here at CA Friend Consulting? Because really here at CA Friend Consulting, it's our goal to help organizations like yours to operate more efficiently. Until next time, thank you. I'm Dr. Christian A. Friend. Have a great day.